So today on the Vida Latina Upstate podcast, we're honored to welcome a guest whose work has become vital to understanding and framing Puerto Rican history and national identity. Nelson A. Denis is the author of the groundbreaking book we have here, War Against All Puerto Ricans, which is a meticulously researched and powerfully articulated account of U.S. colonial rule in Puerto Rico and the life of nationalist leader and the arch-independentista Don Pedro Isu Campos. The book is a New York Times bestseller and helped reignite public conversation around the legacy of Puerto Rican nationalism. In addition to being a brilliant, prolific writer, Mr. Denis is also a Harvard and Yale-educated attorney, a former New York State Assemblyman, and a screenwriter and filmmaker. And his advocacy of Puerto Rican issues has made him a respected figure in both political and cultural spaces. Don Pedro's story, in many ways, begins and ends in tragedy. He was born in Tenerias in the slums of Ponce to a poor Afro-Boricua single mother who took her own life. How did these wounds shape the man he became?
I'll be to my understanding, from what I could see, had not certainly a far from ideal childhood. It was really, rock bottom poor, and some of his early childhood photographs, he doesn't have any shoes. I think that his color had a great deal to do with it. He was very, very dark skinned, and it even stood out in some of his classroom photographs. As a child, he didn't go into enter school until something like in the fourth or fifth grade. But the moment he went in, he started skipping grades. He was, just such a quick learner, and he became the head of in high school. He became the head of the debate team, valedictorian, and he got a scholarship. I mean, how often did that happen back in the early 1900s for a dark-skinned Puerto Rican to get a complete scholarship to the University of Vermont? And he stood out. He shined so much there that in short order, within I think it was 2 years, he got a full scholarship to go to Harvard, and he was the first Puerto Rican to go to Harvard and then Harvard Law School. He didn't seem to manifest those early. It didn't register as far as I could see in my research. But he did become aware of it when he went to Harvard. He became the head of the Cosmopolitan Club, which was very internationally oriented and welcomed and dealt with international political figures when they came in. And he met Iman de Valera, and he helped write the first draft. The Irish. Iman de Valera, and he helped write the first draft of the Irish Free Constitutional State. He had an accelerated in whatever issues that presented themselves that they didn't really register deeply, but he became increasingly aware when he came to the United States. Then they sent him on a tour after World War I, and the speaking tour, and in the Deep South, and it is there that he became really deeply aware of the discrepancies and the injustice that black people were undergoing in the United States, and so that had apparently an early influence on radicalizing him with respect to the United States, because he realized that the treatment Puerto Ricans were receiving was systemic, that there was there's sort of a deep racial component to it. That's where I saw that it started really impinging upon him, that the Great American Dream was selectively available.
Do the sales of the book kind of, have you seen any notable increases in different periods of time, or is it pretty much the same, or are there spikes like that you've been able to?
In the first two or 3 years, there's some really big spikes in the week before and after the Puerto Rican Day Parade.
Oh,
wow. The sales doubled. Let me jump around a little bit. Can I just say something about the Puerto Rican Day Parade?
Sure.
All right. The reason that it came out with sort of an explosive presence on the New York scene. It had to do with Public Law 53, La Ley de la Mordaza, because for 9 years Puerto Ricans and it was all to basically keep the Nationalist Party and Albizu Campos hermetically sealed from the rest of the Puerto Rican population and from the rest of the world. Public Law 53 declared it a felony, punishable by up to 10 years in jail. And I think it was a $5,000 fine, which is a heck of a lot of money in Puerto Rico in those days, for saying a word, uttering anything, singing a song, distributing a pamphlet, any public utterance against the United States or in favor of Puerto Rican revolution. Any of that was a violation of Public Law 53. In other words, they eviscerated the First Amendment on the island of Puerto Rico in order to shut up one man. Well, that lasted for 9 years. Oh, and you couldn't not alone display the Puerto Rican flag, but even own it privately in your own home. And you could have a Puerto Rican flag the size of a postcard, the size of a postage stamp, in your closet. And if the insular police came in and found it, you would be vulnerable. You'd be exposed to going to jail. They used it selectively. They could because otherwise they'd have to jail the whole island. So obviously they could. But when the moment that levantaron la ley 53, it was that year that the Puerto Rican Day Parade started. That was the first year of the existence of the Puerto Rican Day Parade. So what the Puerto Rican Day Parade here in the United States was a manifestation, was an explosive emotional embrace of the fact that we can now at least say that we exist. We can now show our flag. And to this day, I don't know if you know this, but there's this surrealistic profusion of Puerto Rican flags. It's become a part of the legend of the parade. I said, wow, that's wildly disproportionate compared to other parades. And sometimes some people organize a flag that is a block long. I don't know if you've seen a photograph of that. There was once in a while, some people decide that that year they want to really display the flag, and so they unfurl a flag that's a block long, and there's no carousels, there's no you can't because the flag is covering the whole block. Again, it's this involvement, this emotional, deep, and in many cases unconscious. Because if you ask a lot of people, they will know. I say, oh yeah, I didn't realize that. It was related to the end, which was finally found by the U.S. Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. A Public Law 53. So
how many years later since the
Ley de la
Mordaza? No, after was it?
It was from 1947 to 1956. The lay existed.
And in 1956, a case was brought to the Supreme Court by whom?
I don't remember, but it went all the way to the Supreme Court to declare it. And I think it was on their shadow docket because it was an expedited thing, and they didn't actually want to give it much undue exposure because it was an American embarrassment. And it was in the context of the existence of the law because the United States was locked into a Cold War battle with Russia for the hearts and minds of the world, and the United States could ill afford to be declaring itself the leader of the free world and at the same time be the owners of the only colony in existence. And so Puerto Rico had a disproportionate political significance but not disproportionate to us because we were the ones that our families, my ancestors were the ones that were suffering directly through it, but it had an exaggerated possible dimension of embarrassment and a political minefield for the United States and that was the really the main thrust of the October Revolution that at that point. Is what Albizu Campos was trying to do was you couldn't win a war against the United States armed conflict. They just bombed Tokyo, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima. Right? And so Hiroshima. So it wasn't that. It was to try. It was a sort of model on the Irish Rising of I think
the Easter Rising,
the Easter Rising, and to just bring what was it
1917 I believe
1917
okay.
To which the Irish had went, but put them on the world, the radar scope of the world, and eventually, wore away in it. Had a great deal to do with the Irish future. So that was what Albizu Campos was trying to do, was just get the attention of the world, because they had taken Puerto Rico off the decolonization committee list in the UN with this Public Law 600 and the referendum that followed, and that's what the revolution, that the nationalist revolution, was timed on the weekend before the referendum vote of Public Law 600, which was the referendum for whether or not to make Puerto Rico a Commonwealth, or stay in its current relationship, which had been repeated over and over and over again. But that was the first time that vote was institutionalized, and that was strategically what they were trying to interfere with, so that the world would know that there was something wrong in Puerto Rico.
Nelson, just a quick question. Since you were talking about the Puerto Rican Day Parade and the end of La Ley de la Mordaza and the coincidence of that, those two events, it brings to mind something that I think is an important fact for idea for our audience, and that is the role of the Puerto Rican diaspora in terms of its effect on the nationalist movement. Can you give us a little bit about what you think on that?
Well, there wasn't much coordination, because, for instance, Oscar Villaso, the two that's that came to Blair House, acted entirely on their own. Once they got here, because there was, very, even at that time there was,
a network.
There was a network, but there wasn't a very highly established communications network. And these were people that were being victimized in public law. Ley de la Mordaza, Public Law 53 was still in place at that time. And so the coordination you kind of went into somewhat of a black hole of communication, and yet the relation of the events of whatever happened here were absolutely critical. The only way that the American mainstream readers and the mainstream media, which was basically the newspapers at the time, became aware that happened, is because of what happened at Blair House. It was only then that the American public really became aware that something had occurred in Puerto Rico that weekend. Again, that the Macondo effect. However, even then, that was perverted, because in the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and the major outlets, they called the incident against Truman at Blair House, that it was perpetrated, according to the media here, by anarchists, socialists, communists, all these isms, right? What they failed to mention is that these two men were from Jayuya, and in fact, both of them had worn the colors of Jayuya, which is orange, and white, and black, on their socks. The socks that they wore on that day. But both of these men were from Jayuya. And the very day before the incident at Blair House, was the day that 10 P-47 Thunderbolt jets had bombed and strafed the sugarcane fields, the mountain areas, the towns themselves of Jayuya and Utuado, the town where these people were born, where their families still lived, were bombed one day before by 10 American jets. Now, if the measure of terrorism is that this degree of political violence, who's the terrorist in that scenario? The day before, 10 jets, as opposed to these two guys who was basically a suicide mission.
Right.
But that element was never ever discussed. That connection was never put forward in the American press. And so again, that gives an example of how imbalanced and how pernicious the information flow was and still is. If you look at it, when did Puerto Rico never entered into the presidential debates, and it doesn't render on the American consciousness until there's a hurricane or some some very extremely negative event
Right.
occur.
Bad Bunny doing a concert.
Like, I mean, the fact that Trump could go and throw toilet paper at Puerto Rican reporters, that bespeaks, or that a comedian could say that there's a pile of garbage in the Caribbean and it's called Puerto Rico,
Right.
So anyway, as to what I was able to discover and read, there wasn't a great coordination. There would be emissaries that would come from here and they'll try to do something, right? But it wasn't. It would be sporadic. It would be the shooting of Congress with Olga or the Blair House event. But it wasn't. I don't think you could call it coordinated.
Right. Daniel has another question.
Yeah. During the 1950 revolt, late October 1950, can you tell us about Vidal, the barber?
Vidal Santiago Diaz.
Yeah.
He was a heck of a character.
Amazing.
What I found, but interesting was also Captain Astro, which I was able to piece all that together directly through long conversations with several nationalists. It's kind of like the FBI was the Boswell of Puerto Rico. They were the ones that actually recorded Puerto Rican history for 15 to 20 years because of late 53. The only one that could write anything that could leave, any indelible imprint about Puerto Rican history was the FBI, and they were all over Vidal Santiago Diaz. The interesting thing was the proximity that it had to Campo Las Casas, which is now El Caserío Luis Llorens. It's the largest public housing complex in Puerto Rico. It's on that tail end tip of Santurce, which is where Campo Las Casas was, which was the training ground for the Puerto Ricans in the U.S. Army. That's where they were training, and Campo Las Casas was less than a mile away from Calle Colton, where the barber shop was located. It was basically cemetery, separated by a cemetery. So you have to think about when Vidal Santiago Diaz was able to fend off snipers, FBI men, National Guard, the Insular Police Force. There's about 40 of them, right? And if you see some of the pictures, they had all sorts of rifles and automatic rifles and snipers and machine guns and everything.
Right.
Now, there's an inherent element in that. If it's only one guy and he's involved in a 4-hour firefight against the 40 guys, that means he had to have a lot of weaponry and ammunition in that barbershop, right? That, in other words, that was a major. I believe it was the central of munitions, the distribution point of ammunition for the Nationalist Party was that barbershop.
Wow.
Because if you think about it, I mean, that's what that's where the firepower was apparently located.
So they were probably stealing some of the munitions, you're saying, from that base?
There's a long footnote in my book about a man named Captain that called himself Captain Astro. And it was Captain Astro, who was a quartermaster at Campo Las Casas, that was selling this stuff. And so he was a equal parts mercenary and patriot, because he was sneaking this stuff out and making himself quite a bundle. He was also, though, apparently this was the deal that was worked out, sneaking food, good amounts of food, out of the I don't know what you call it, the commissary, the Campo Las Casas commissary, which Vidal Santiago was using to, and before Vidal Santiago Diaz, El Águila Blanca, they were feeding Puerto Rican families with that food from that barbershop. And and so Captain Astro, again, he was selling the food, but he was unwittingly acting as a great patriot on behalf of destitute Puerto Ricans at that time. So I don't know what your question was here. Oh, here's one thing. When was basically a suicide mission to go to the governor's mansion and
La
try to
Fortaleza.
execute La Fortaleza. which didn't happen, and really had no hopes of happening, because that corridor was so was under such surveillance. This is after already the October Revolution had started. It was, and remember, as you said, it was late October, early November. So that substantiates. I hope that your audience can understand that coincides exactly with the election schedule, the first Tuesday of November, and that's when they were actually going to do it a couple of days later, but word got out that there was a plan to assassinate Albizu Campos that weekend, so they had to accelerate everything. When that suicide trip to that car with 4 or 5 people in it, and the person that was leading that had been the head of the ¿cómo se llamaban los soldaditos? The cadets of the Republic. The cadets of the Republic, right? The commander of the cadets of the Republic, he was Raimundo Diaz. And it's in the book. There's the FBI. As I said, the FBI was the biographer, the Boswell of Puerto Rico. There was I managed to get it. Right? It was Raimundo Diaz and Faustino Diaz Pacheco. Faustino Diaz Pacheco was the brother of Raimundo. Raimundo had been the head of the Cadets of the Republic for about 15 years. But Faustino, according to the FBI report, had been an informant during all that time. So that means that the Nationalist Party was deeply infiltrated at its highest ranks, and the FBI knew exactly what was going on. They through Faustino, they learned the financing, the command structure, the meeting schedule, the policy initiatives, the membership. Huh? Like I said, yeah. And so when that became known, because word got out, you no longer saw Faustino. He was gone. But Raimundo was demoted immediately. It had to be from his position. He was in absolute disgrace, and he knew that probably his life is that his days were numbered. So what was left to him, and this is is completely inferential. All right. It was discussed. It was discussed with me with a couple of people, but there's no other than a sort of an oral history to it. There's no written record, but it makes complete emotional sense that this guy headed up what he knew would be a suicide mission as the only way of trying to recover his family name, of recovering some kind of honor before dying. And so I figured, what am I going to do? I'm going to be killed sooner or later, so I might as well go on the worst mission possible, lead it, and thereby recover some degree of honor in death. So this was a death mission, and they stopped by the barber shop because he was going to go. So he had been scheduled to go with them, but when he realized what was happening, he saw it. El Barbero refused to go. He said, "No, I'm not going." And so now he had, some sort of conscience, so when instead of giving up and giving himself up, he fought off, and he knew that it was a losing battle, but he fought it to the end in that barbershop, and then it was, there was that emotional underpinning, and by the way, it was the equivalent to the War of the Worlds broadcast here in the United States, and it was the first time that the entire media, all the media of Puerto Rico, were all focused on one thing.
Wow.
On that barbershop battle. That was
Are there any recordings of that, Nelson? Are there any recordings?
Yeah, there is one. Yeah, and you know what? I think you'd actually go on YouTube, Vidal Santiago Diaz, and you could hear a broadcast with some gunfire in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I forget. It might be in my footnotes. It might be cited. Just look in the chapter. So there is, but. And what struck me on that, just that it's sort of a coda, the denouement, all of this is that when they carried him out, because the only way that they finally do it is I think they bazooka or something the barbershop, and the whole staircase fell on top of on him and on Vidal. Then the National Guard goes in, and then this crackerjack from Southern dude shoots him point blank in the head. Yeah. Shoots the guy that they told, although that, ahead. Then they're carrying out the corpse, and the corpse opened his eyes. And the guy's still alive, and everybody sort of scurries behind cars and everything because this is like a ghost, and that's when they became a superhero of Puerto Rico. And then the final quote, I'm sorry, is that after that, because that's how he became deeply religious. He became Pentecostal for the rest of his life, deeply religious, and who can blame him?
Yeah. Talking about religion.
Yeah. Speaking of religion, this is not Pentecostal rather, but Catholic. So Albizu was what we call a cradle Catholic, I guess. He maintained strong faith in the church, regardless of negative externalities. He invoked it often in his speeches, using Christ as a prototype of resistance. So he said once, Christ was persecuted, he was ridiculed, he was condemned, but he was not defeated. Just as Christ was nailed to the cross, so too shall Puerto Rico bear the nails of empire before its resurrection. And he also said, we do not want to be a colony of the Protestant North. We want to be a Catholic nation under God. That was in Ponce in the 1930s. So framing the Puerto Rican struggle.
Can I stop a moment? That is fantastic. I commend your research. No, I'm not kidding. I think that's the first time. I believe that's the first time I hear that.
Yeah,
that's really I want to bow to you on that. That's really fantastic. I mean that. I wish that I had. I wish that I had found it and put it in my book. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, so he framed it very much as like a spiritual battle, the battle for independence. How much did his faith, which amounted to kind of a Catholic integralism, how much did it play a role in his personal story and in the revolution itself?
Well, one thing that people, I think, misrepresented is, there was a vested interest on the part of Muñoz Marín to corner him and picture him, especially after the revolution, as a madman and a psychotic, violent individual, deranged, and something snapped during his childhood or something. When in fact Albizu was people that that's why they call him Don Pedro. He was actually a peaceful, patient, sagacious, but very. There was sort of a noblesse oblige to him that he conducted Sunday school in Ponce, for many years, even as a nationalist.
He founded the Knights of Columbus at Harvard, I think, too.
I didn't know. Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure, 90%.
Okay, I wasn't aware of.
He might have.
But what characterized him was a sense of justice, and it was consistent with the founding principles that government requires the consent of the governed, and that all men are created equal. And so, he was really operating and living within the founding principles of our own country. And I think that part of his power lay in the fact that he was always appealing to, and he was a lawyer, to reason and logic, and he would build things up like like a law case. It would be brick by brick by brick, and so until it was an irrefutable, indomitable argument, and that argument was precisely what the United States did not want to get off the island. And in fact, I forget he became the Attorney General and then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico. He was the author of. I can look up right now. Well, no, you don't have time. He was the one that appeared at all the congressional subcommittees and at the UN hearings, who argued that the Commonwealth referendum reflected the voice of the people, when in fact it was conducted under the aegis of Public Law 53. And if you can't utter a word or say anything against the United States, how are you going to vote against the United States when there were paper ballots and the boxes could be opened? But anyways, he wrote. He had graduated from Yale Law School, and he published through Yale University Press a book called Puerto Rico, the Last Colony in the World, and he made it very clear. he was the author of he was the principal draftsman of Public Law 600. Created the whole the Commonwealth procedural structure for conducting that vote. Well, and then he was rewarded by being made the Attorney General and then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico. Well, in that book, he himself stated it was the purpose of the book. He calls it the last colony in the world.
Right.
That was just intended as a tapestry to having a completely unchanged, continuing social, political, economic, and political relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. And so it was what was Albizu Campos was up against. And when he finally resorted to a very well planned and surgically precise revolution, it wasn't because it's very difficult to conduct a revolution in your own island, in a small island, and then you're basically shooting at your own people. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to minimize that. It was actually a three-step military effort. The first one being it started by outbreak from prison, from the Rio Piedras and also Blanco. And I think it was 104 people escaped. That's quite a prison break into the island. So then while you have 104 fugitives all spread out all over the island, and the police is chasing them around like Keystone cops, and it's all confusion. That was phase one, and it all happened during that weekend. Phase two is while the cops were out there, they would simultaneously commandeer the police headquarters in each of those 8 towns and get the weaponry from the precincts. That was step 2. And then step 3 was a massive retreat from all those 8 towns to Utuado, which is centrally located in the island, surrounded by a range of mountains. There were some sympathetic farmers who would feed them for a period of time, and for 1 or 2 weeks. And during what they hoped would be then the aborted referendum vote, they could send out press releases to the world about what was happening in Puerto Rico. So it was really more of a public relations effort than this massive, violent, encounter between Puerto Ricans. And so, everything that Albizu did was always, very thoughtful or planned out, and using against violence only as a matter of self-defense, as a last resort, not because that was inherent in his personality. So he was a peaceful man within the framework of his faith.
Yeah. So that leads me to a question. I've tried to wrap my head around. It seems as if, what happened in 1898, the invasion of Puerto Rico, has been followed by a succession of kind of
legal structures.
Impromptu kind of jazz improvisation by the United States government as far as what its ultimate plan for Puerto Rico is. There have been different phases of it. As you go into your book, after the invasion, the whole disruption of the economy, the devaluation of the peso, the takeover of agriculture by agribusiness on the island. But it seems to shift every so often from one thing to another. So there's been an evolution, right, of what the strategy is, but there seems to be no real cogent driving kind of thought or that defines the relationship between the U.S. and Puerto Rico, other than obviously colonization and exploitation and extraction. But would you agree that there seems to be kind of a catch-as-catch-can approach to the U.S. government's strategy or idea for Puerto Rico?
Yeah, and actually you hit on an important sort of a transcendent dynamic. And you said it yourself, it was a colonization and exploitation. When they first went in, it was perceived as the primary value was to see it as a naval coaling recoaling station. Because in those days, that's how there's no airplanes, and it would take about 5 to 7 days to go from Puerto Rico to New York or Washington back then. Actually, longer at the beginning. a little bit over a week. And so that was the perception. But then it changed pretty quickly when the first civilian governor, Charles Herbert Allen, went in there. They took over in 1898, and in 1901, Charles Herbert Allen goes in, and he only lasted 14 months. He devoted most of his time to and he put it plainly in the first year's fiscal report to President McKinley. Because at that time, the civilian governors of Puerto Rico had to always hand in a yearly report to the president, and in that yearly report, his yearly report, Charles Herbert Allen, he apparently conducted massive soil sample studies all throughout Puerto Rico, which found it to be the most fertile and productive sugar producing environment on the planet. More than Hawaii, more than the Philippines, more than Cuba, more than he compared it, and it was very detailed, and I put that in the book. And 2 weeks after handing in his fiscal report to McKinley, he resigned as governor, went up to Wall Street, became a vice president of Morgan Guaranty Trust, and within 10 years became treasurer, then president, then chairman of the board of the American Sugar Refining Company, which today, just a mere subsidiary of the Sugar Refining, today is known as Domino Sugar. To give you a sense of the extensity of his holdings. And what Charles Herbert Allen had done is he had positioned over 600 American expats, virtually none of whom spoke any Spanish, into the Puerto Rican government and the bureaucracy, and then they returned the favor when he resigned with riparian rights, tax subsidies, advanced information on public auctions of land, all sorts of preferences that were not available to anyone else, and he became basically the first sugar king of Puerto Rico, reducing a previously diversified and self-sustaining economy. About 80% of the economy of Puerto Rico was agriculture, diversified: coffee, sugar, tobacco, pineapple, fruits, all sorts of things. It was turned into a one-crop cash cow economy, that of sugar. And Charles Herbert Allen was the first one to do it. And he did it so quickly with, there was a certain genius or evil genius to what he did. He didn't tell anyone. He handed in his report. 2 weeks later, he quits, and he puts it all into effect. And so ever since then, a red carpet has stretched from Wall Street to San Juan, because when people saw what he was able to accomplish so quickly, it became like it became the gold rush of Puerto Rico. People, all sorts of carpetbaggers and scalawags have been going down there ever since, making their fortune. And you're right, it did evolve. So it went from naval coaling station to land to sugar. And then after the 30s and 40s,
pharmaceutical, right?
But before that, Operation Bootstrap, which Congressman Vito Marcantonio on the floor of the Congress called it Operation Booby Trap, because what it was all these subsidies to American corporations who made all sorts of labor and employment promises and tax. It will be contributing taxes to the Puerto Rican Treasury, and then it wouldn't happen because they would then apply for cost reductions and for exceptions to what they had contracted to. Say, oh no, we found some substratum of soil that required some pouring in more concrete. They come up with all sorts of variances in the contract, which in the end would reduce their commitment and their contribution to the Puerto Rican economy without exchanging the tax subsidies that the Operation Bootstrap provided. And then that evolved into Act 20 and 21, I think it was 20 and 21, that provided 20-year suspension on interest, dividend, and capital gains income to all these corporations. And then it was under that umbrella that the pharmaceuticals came in with those two acts. 20-year tax, and then when the tax subsidy period expired after 20 years, they would leave, and they'll go to maybe to Thailand, Cambodia,
and that ended after Laos. That ended during the Clinton administration, didn't it?
Yeah. And for a while, Puerto Rico was producing 25% of all the world's pharmaceutical drugs. The whole all of them. And one town, Barceloneta, which I had previously thought was a suburb of Barcelona in Spain. Barceloneta, one factory in the town, a Pfizer factory in Barceloneta, was producing all the Viagra consumed in Canada and United States.
In the world.
I mean, you can't, and so, there's no question that we've contributed to the quality of life and the joy of living of the Americans. But also, that bespeaks the fact that if Puerto Rico the island of Puerto Rico and its labor force could produce 25% of the world's pharmaceuticals, that is a very exacting industry. You have to be really, precise in the production of that product, or millions of people will die. So the fact that Puerto Rico could produce that, on timetable, with the degree of volume that was coming out of that island, that says something about the Puerto Rican labor force in terms of its ability, its technical ability, and its willingness to work. So there's a tremendous misperception that Puerto Ricans are just lying down on the beach collecting benefits and not paying any taxes. Completely wrong.
Thank you for watching the Vida Latina Upstate podcast, brought to you by Virtual Barrio Productions. And thank you to Excelsior Advisors. Follow us on Instagram at Vida Latina Podcast. That's Vida Latina Podcast on Instagram. Subscribe to this channel, Vida Latina Upstate Podcast, for more content every 2 weeks. And thank you to my dad, Denis, and Siempre Pa'lante. Ciao.